All right. The preacher said, I tell you what I'm going to tell you, then I tell you, then I tell you what I told you. Well, I think that all libertarians and anarchists should have a great and thick and full, rich understanding of what they're doing, and that takes historical research. One should always have a book with them. One should learn all this stuff. And so, for instance, you should know that the written anarchists, they start to really produce tomes and theories and stuff, started all the way back in the 19th century in Russia. Guys like Prince Peter Kropotkin. Does that ring a bell? He went from 1849 to 1921. He was an anarcho-commie. And he was not in favor. He got axed here and there. He finally had to flee, went to Switzerland. He was jailed in France for 4 years. We went back to his mother Russia after the people took over. Lenin and his gang took over.
What was his last name?
Kropotkin, Kropotkin. And then what they had created there was state communism. A giant bureaucracy. It was just nothing more than a dictatorship. And Prince Peter Kropotkin didn't like that and died unhappy. His relative peer was Leo Tolstoy. Yeah, it's a real guy. and Tolstoy was a mystic, a Christian mystic, and a pacifist. And wrote a bunch of nice little books, and everybody regards him as a great author.
Founder of Christian anarchism.
Yeah.
Kingdom of God.
And the other ones, like Bakunin and people like that, they were murdered or axed by one of the people that, not the people, but the system. The system couldn't take their reaction to them. So they all died off or were killed off. But around the same time, and even earlier, in America, a different tradition started, and that is American individualist anarchism. And I hope you're familiar with all these guys. The first guy was, of any note, was Thomas Paine. These are the times that try men's souls, the rights of man, rationalism. And with a passion, he hated the British royal family. And today we watch it on TV. Oh, what a bunch of fat, sick, non-working parasites. Oh, I'm going to admire you. Americans don't really feel that way. And yet, we are contradictory. We look at the royals with some type of envy. Anyway, Thomas Paine began one of the American tradition of writing, and he was one with the anti-British forces. One of the people of his day wrote of Thomas Paine, quote, "Without Thomas Paine's pen, Washington would have no army." Yes, because he went with the troops, and he said, "Let's go, let's go, let's go," and he stayed with them. He was a perfect and sincere rabble rouser against the Brits. Then in the 19th century, we have 3 or 4 famous guys that I hope you've heard of. Lysander Spooner edited Liberty magazine. He was from 1808 to 1887.
Founder of the American Mail Company.
Yep. Yes. And a lot of these guys, because there was no bureaucracy to stop them, they just did it themselves. Josiah Warren. Does that ring a bell? Well, if it doesn't, you ought to look him up. And you can look at these notes later or whatever. And he was an individualist anarchist and said so. He was an inventor, a musician. He was a printer. And he was regarded by some as the first genuinely open American anarchist, although he never used the term. He just called himself a believer in freedom. And in those days, they actually took that thing literally. He was an abolitionist. He didn't believe in the either the state of Lincoln or the state of the South when they broke up, and he didn't believe in. There you go. That's Henry David Thoreau.
Wait, hang on. Yeah, I just feel that.
What I'm trying to get at is, in addition to all the people you already know, there's a whole bunch of other ones, like Benjamin Tucker, and then and he was a self-described anarchist by age 18. All of these Americans were individualist anarchists. They had no place for the state. They lived surrounded by the state. And like a woman told me at a seminar once, she was one of the many, many people that advocated a means of avoiding the IRS. She said the state is a giant oaf, O-A-F, oaf. You got that? A monster. You just see Disney creating such a. I can do that pretty well. That's the state, and all its little minions are slow, and they're waiting to be told what to do. Because you can't have a bureaucrat with initiative, and that's in a sense why the state is such a monster. It's so you can't do anything efficiently. So, so she says we anti-state people, anti-IRS people can run around in the interstices. It's like a giant clockwork with a huge thing, bong, bong, and we little mice can run around all the little mechanisms because they move so slow, and we can avoid their wrath. But it takes a little idea, and that is not to anger them openly. Don't expect to remain free as an anarchist and a non-payer of taxes if you go out and stand in the public street, or in this case in our day on radio and television, with anti-state speeches and telling other people don't pay taxes. Well, because then they'll come grab you. And Robert Lefebvre, early in the 20th century, he was an American anarchist. He was a pacifist. His famous line was, if someone puts you in manacles, you can't destroy those manacles. They're his manacles. He believed in their property rights. And he was such a magnificent teacher. He taught Roy Childs, by the way.
What's his school called? The Freedom School?
Yeah, it was in Colorado. Yeah. I had many debates with the man, and he was just a warm, wonderful teacher. And he was just happened to be a pacifist, and he said, well, if you guys want to make war, that's okay. He's not going to stop us. And Murray Rothbard. One should, well, you knew Murray, his statement about if you're a libertarian, you're an anarchist. If you're an anarchist, you ought to be a libertarian. And we should all know these things and why. He is all over the net. So is Robert Lefebvre. You want to find out. He's got speeches and all his books. A lot of them are on the Mises Institute pages.
I think Rich is a Rothbard guru. Right?
No, that's good. Well, I have the advantage of having met the man,
Okay.
and he worked for me as my bellboy. No, he was here in Hawaii for a week, and we just kept him on his toes, going from one station to another, to this speech, to that. And the next day, after staying up to 2 or 3 in the morning with the girls, which was his reputation, he's always hustling the girls, and he's in his 60s. Of course.
I didn't know that about him.
Oh, yeah.
You said the plain
I didn't say he caught him, but he sure hustled him. And the next day at 9 o'clock, he's, where are we going, Fred? I'm ready. And he was shaved, showered, ready to go. He was a good guy, and there's some people that don't like him. But Rothbard was,
Appointed you for a reason?
if you, well, you know who it is. Yeah, well, he had a difference.
He was part of her
Coterie, yes.
and inside group.
And then his wife refused to unbecome a Catholic.
Right.
And so they all vetoed him.
There's a funny play about that on YouTube.
But Rothbard is worth looking at, and especially reading his books. And one of his favorites that is so good is, what has government done to our money? You just, after you read that, what? I mean, let's go Bitcoin. So then all of this gets down to a group of principles that we ought to know about and avoid or use to our benefit. And that is the government, from the time of early on, has always used fear. You don't do what we do and we'll bash your head. That's what Kamehameha did, right? Bash the head. Now it's a little bit more sophisticated. We put them in prisons. and employ a whole bunch of people to be their prison. In other words, do a minimum for us, and we'll let you stay alive out of a prison. And a lot of people buy this. Oh, if I don't do what they say, meaning file your tax forms and be a little servant, a good servant, then you will be put in prison. When in fact, the vast bulk of people who don't do it don't end up in prison. And now I'd like to tell you about the strategy that doesn't work. Okay? And this is a tactic that we learned in Robert A. Heinlein's The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. Read it?
Nope.
Should. Read it?
Yeah.
Well,
Read
his...
the first half 3 times. I never finished it.
You should. The protagonist in that book is a guy that's a computer guru, one-armed, and his name is Manny Garcia. I wrote it down because it's O'Kelly Davis. And he's the one that figures out that this computer has become sentient. And he tells him jokes because he's sentient, but he's like a baby. He just wants to tell jokes. Anyway, Manny has figured out, they're on the moon, by the way, and the authority is crushing them, of course, and although they didn't. It was originally set up as a penal colony, but all the descendants of the penal colony, they're not guilty of anything, they're not criminals. So they started a really relatively very free market society. The only thing is a lot of their wheat and a lot of their stuff they grow is sent on these rocket ships to Earth. Well, they can live without Earths. And it's been years. So there's going to be a revolution. And Manny and the computer are orchestrating it. And but the rest of the people are afraid because they can't leave the moon. There's no guard towers. It's a physiological thing. They stay more than a couple of months on the moon. The lack of gravity stretches them. It's only 1/6 G there, and so they're stretched. And if you're born there, you're really stretched. You're all tall. But if you go to Earth, you're crushed. And so you can't go to Earth without very special means. And so the idea with Manny is that he has learned how to tap into the central core of electricity, which gets directly from the surface. The sun strikes all these mirrors on the surface. It's collected, and then it goes down to all the people. And it's 24 hours a day, continuous, and it's just, he pays a little bit. He has an account, and very small, and he pays. And the purpose of this is to keep them away. Well, he's got an account, and he's paying it on time, so they leave him alone. When 95% of it is actually, he gets around it and does all the stuff he really wants to do, because he has learned a way to steal it. And in other words, he doesn't get on a soapbox and do anti-state stuff. He just lives his life in the interstices like the little mice that are faster than all the goons of the state. And so he's very successful. All right, I'm going to tell you what I did personally, but as I was in Alaska, I was on a radio station called KABN, and I had every single anti-tax guru. One of the very first people I had was Irwin Schiff. And Irwin Schiff was this tough-talking New Yorker.
Is that Peter Schiff's dad?
Yep.
Yes, yeah, indeed. And Irwin Schiff just had hardcore anti-IRS feelings, and I felt that way too. And he said, we got to do this, this, and this, and get everybody against the IRS and get everybody's not paying. He was put in jail. The IRS got him, put him in jail, because he broke Manny's law. He had no substantial defense against him and did it all publicly, and so they took him. And then the same thing happened to Tim, a guy I interviewed. He was in a prison in Minnesota. Tim X, I call him. He was a hardcore libertarian.
Tim Bright?
No, but okay, doesn't really matter.
The official term they use is tax protester.
Yeah, well, he was more than a protester. He was declared guilty by a jury, and it's always they go for 3 years. He was declared guilty, but between the time of sentencing and the time of actually turning himself in, he split into the Alaskan wilderness and stayed there for a couple years while his wife was unhappy with living out in the bush. And so they came into Anchorage to reassociate themselves with people. And one of his, quote, friends turned him into the FBI.
Really?
And the FBI goons came and grabbed him. Now they've got him in prison, not just for being a tax non-filer, but for evading them. Ooh. So they put him in a little bit harder prison. That's where I first met Tim on the radio.
He got out after 3 years.
Oh no, I think he got out after about 1.7.
Oh.
They never keep you in long, it's too expensive. Another good friend of mine, Alex Newhall, he worked on the ships that came into Anchorage, as he said, throwing chains, dragging chains around him. He was a union worker and made a lot of money. And he too, they all joined this, not Tim, but they all joined a group of right-wingers. And at the time, they were very anti-Semitic. And they just couldn't understand why I wouldn't go for that. And each one of these guys, Alex Newhall, who had a beautiful wife and just a pleasant guy, he and I used to go shooting. A jury declared him guilty on Christmas Eve in Anchorage. And he was my good friend. And when I heard that, I walked out to my car and bawled like a baby because of the injustice involved here. They put him in a prison down in Oregon, and they let him go out and paint fire hydrants and stadia for the next 11 months. And then they put him in a halfway house, and he was back in Anchorage. Another guy, he was about a 6'4" gas station owner in Anchorage, had 3 kids. He was a successful entrepreneur, hardcore mechanic. He too joined these people that were professing to be totally anti-IRS. He was indicted and found guilty, and he was given 3 years. He was sent to Arizona to an Air Force installation. I think he stayed at night in the, what do they call it? Not a prison, a brig. They say the people that refuse to file, they're not tough guys. They're not. They're normal Midwestern. Well, this guy was a successful businessman. They just can't treat him like prisoners. Well, he was immediately put in charge of all the vehicle repair, and he was so good at it, he just upped it completely, and he could finish his job by noon every day. Then they let him play golf. He played golf at this Air Force, and they all liked him because he was a pleasant fellow. And about 8 months later, I saw him in Anchorage. The feds had flown him in to do testimony on another case. He was lean, he was tan, he looked like $1 million. And I said, "Hey, prison looks pretty good on you." He said, "Yeah, all I do is play golf and do a little work." Yeah. But this is not to say he would like it. What I'm saying is that they put you in prison, but they don't really fuss with you hardcore. That was my friend. It was the attorney guy, or no, the gas station owner. All of these guys broke Manny's rule. They joined with others and campaigned to get rid of the IRS. So what did I do? I learned all about this when I was at the University of Hawaii, and when I got out of the University of Hawaii, I got a job in radio, and I was spinning records. And then later, I came back from Washington and got a job doing talk shows, where he and I once portrayed
Jefferson and
no, Adam Smith and Thomas Paine. Well, I was talking first about the history of anarcho-capitalism and how the Europeans were usually commies or syndicalists or religious pacifists, not individualist American kind of anarchists. If you look at it, I summed it up once as, hey, I own stuff, you own stuff, we exchange to our own best interest. And what's the state got to do with it? Nothing. That's a summary of individualist anarchism, and it accepts the notion of the rights of private property. Anyway, so it's right after I got out of the university, and I worked in radio, and I went up to Alaska, and I was doing talk shows up there, and I met all these, they were right-wingers, and they liked my economics, but they did not like my religion, because, so they had to learn to bump into that, and
Because you have no religion.
well, and plus I was vocal about it. I would have entire shows on that subject, at least once a year. And so I also had a lot of these guys. I'll bet I had 8 or 9 major gurus come up, including Irwin Schiff, and discuss how their particular brand of anti-IRS is the best way to go. You'll never go to prison. And almost all of them did. They almost all did. Why? Because they broke Manny's rule, they got on a soapbox and preached it. Then that's like saying, IRS, come get me. In the meantime, I signed a federal form called a 1099, which is for people that work on a radio station, for instance, but not as an employee, but as an independent contractor. And the owner of the station was what was that? Scientist? No.
Scientology?
Scientologist. Yes, he was a Scientologist. He hated the IRS as much as I did or more. You never sent it in. I worked there about 10, 11 years on and off, and he never sent it in. And so later the Social Security Administration sent me a letter, and this letter indicated, these are all the contributions you've made. Contributions. As if I volunteered this money. But they had good decades of nothing. I had no contributions. So I kind of broke the rule. I had a lot of people on my show who were against the Fed and all sorts of gurus. Almost all of them were put in prison for some time or another. And at one point, after I had this particularly vocal guy named Alex Newhall, the next Monday I got a call from this thug. He was just a thug. Hello, with a tough guy voice. It was right out of a movie. And I said, hello back. And he said, you the guy with the show? And I said, well, I do a show, but what do you want? I want the tape. I said, I mean, you're after Alex Newhall. I'll bet you're from the IRS. Yeah, I want the tape. I said, look, you don't need to have all this tough guy stuff. Just come over to the station, give me $19.95, and I'll give you a copy. It's for sale. It's a public thing. I sell them to everybody. I lied. I didn't sell them openly, and I also charged him $19.95. I would have given most of them away for $9. And so,
If the government's paying.
and of course, yeah, that's no good. That's right. So then the next day, I got a very suave call from the Anchorage federal attorney, his boss. This guy was educated and had he was an attorney, and he could speak and was educated above the 8th grade level. And I said, your thug called me up, and I imitated him. I want the tape. I said, why didn't you just tell him to buy it? Didn't need to put on any airs or try to intimidate me. And they informed me about a month later that I was going to have my banks. They were going to investigate all my money doings and my trails. Kenji got word of this. He was in Japan at the time. We would send back audio cassettes, remember? 90-minute audio cassettes BSing about what we're doing.
This was before Skype.
Yeah. well before Skype, about 84, 5, 6. So he gets all worried when I told him the IRS was going to investigate my financials. He sent me a whole bunch of lira. No, yen. Right, Japanese currency?
Yeah.
This wad of yen appears in my mail, and I took it down to the
Defense.
yeah my defense, but I knew they weren't going to get anything because I used banks hardly ever. And they were checking things back in Hawaii. I had nothing in them. And see, they must have gone to 1 or 2 or 6 banks and found nothing. Anyway, so nothing ever happened to me. Meantime, all these guys are going to prison. And I discovered that I was kind of feigning indifference, that I was just doing a radio show and oh yeah, well, and letting them be the ones that talked about their anti-IRS position. And so I also was making, my radio money was not as much as I made with the Libertarian Party running raffles. And I found all sorts of ways of making money under the covers. Did I say that, under the covers?
Under the table.
Oh, I meant under the covers. I was a prostitute. No. I dreamed about that. I made, it was under the table, yeah. I had a lot of cash under the table, and and also, once I was off the radio, I stopped talking. I didn't lead any campaigns against the state. And so, like a little mouse, I was able to go around the interstices of this huge, big clock of government and freely mump around. And that's what I encourage people to do, or as David Friedman would say, create a life of your own, especially in your economics, your income and outgo, where you don't need to rely upon the state at all, where the state is irrelevant. But on the other hand, don't be a damn martyr to it. Do like Marty. Give him a little here and there. Maybe have a little job that pays you 1/100th of what you actually make, and have an account with them and pay them a little. That'll keep them off your back. But in the main, live without them. And that's the position he took, and I saw a lot of sense in that, and I still do. And today, with computers and all the ways you guys can make money with Bitcoin and I have a friend named IG. Do you remember IG? Rich Richardson. I met him here in Hawaii. He was on that first radio station where all the libertarians were.
KGRT?
Something.
KGRT?
No, it wasn't KGRT. It was like that. But anyway, he was on, we were both on, and I went on one time, and then they closed the thing down. Wadamo closed it
That
down.
was KGRT.
No.
That was on-
Something like that.
And then they had Channel 13 on the TV station, on TV.
Well,
For a while.
IG became a ravenously interesting, he was like a new man because he encountered Rand, and Rand bowled him over. He encountered Robert Lefebvre, the pacifist teacher, and he encountered all these really good intellects, Rothbard, and I think he even met and talked to Ron Paul, and he was simply a new man, because he had been a siding salesman, and he had been a drinker, and his life was really bad. He said, I used to drink half the night, and I'd get up and have 6 donuts for breakfast and booze. And that's the way he was, until he began to find out about all these philosophers and writers who advocated individual liberty. And of course, he dove into that, and he said, I'm not doing any more of this working for the man. He began to go around, and he would buy stuff at garage sales, fix it, clean it up, make it looking good, and then take it out to the swap meet on Sunday and sell it for 5 times what he bought it for.
Oh, yeah.
And he could make a good living like that. And he did that for about a decade. And then he got into gold coins. And one time I was at Coco's restaurant. Remember Coco's?
Mm-hmm.
It was at the corner of Kalakaua and Kapiolani. And
Right where Hard Rock Cafe is. For the
yes, exactly. And so we're in there, and Bill Danks and I and my wife and all this, and IG's gonna release an executive suitcase, he opened it up like this, and it was full of gold. It's about $500,000 of doubloons and eagles and double eagles, and he was
Year
making.
was that? Like around
I had to think about
You get
that.
Inflation adjust it?
It was
Yeah, no, I'm
about,
trying to think how much was gold back then. Like,
well,
I remember when I first started reading about gold, it was actually worth more than by the ounce or weed was actually worth more than gold. at that
well,
time.
it quickly rocketed after that.
Well, because in the 80s. It was
Yeah, early 80s. But he didn't just have double eagles.
down.
He
It
had
went way down. It was down to like 3.
he had doubloons. He had special, very rare coins with him that might cost $20,000 or $30,000 each,
You would get your wife to collect all the coins from her waitressing job.
and go through them for silver.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I learned quickly that there was a lot of different. Oh, and he made a living at doing that. If he were alive today, he'd be into Bitcoin. And so what I'm saying, essentially, with the facts I've adduced,
I do remember the name, but I can't remember the face.
is that there's ways to do it. We can live without the state, and so that when the time comes, when there's revolution, we're already set. We don't need the state.